All right. Well, thank you. Well, good afternoon to those of you here and those of you watching us virtually. My name is John Murphy. I'm BIO's Chief Policy Officer, and welcome to the BIO International Convention, first and foremost. Thank you for supporting this great event and for coming to listen a little bit about a particularly interesting topic that, for those of you who spend as much time in Washington as I do working on biotech issues, you would not be wrong to think that the prevailing wisdom is that most drugs are developed by the NIH by itself, and there is no influence from any other factors. But I think what you'll see is that prevailing wisdom is demonstrably untrue, and really the ecosystem of the biopharma community is predicated on a very robust system of public-private partnerships fueled by many of the academic and nonprofit labs throughout the United States and more globally. And they contribute just an incredible amount of economic impact as well as scientific impact to the industry. And we at BIO have had a great partnership with AUTM for many years, and you'll see going through the report that we in the biotech industry have benefited from a great partnership with universities and nonprofit organizations over the past, well, I don't know how many years, but 25 years for purposes of today. And so I think that these are the kinds of things that are really valuable for us in reporting out the real evidence of how the biopharmaceutical industry ecosystem exists, and to sort of tear down the misperceptions that only one entity or only one government funding source is the root of innovative development for biopharmaceutical drugs. So that is kind of a really important tool set for us moving forward. And so I'm going to introduce now Steve Susalka from AUTM to kind of preview the report for you, and then we have a couple of really good examples to follow. So thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks, John. All right, thank you, John. As John mentioned, we are here today to preview the economic contribution of university nonprofit inventions in the U.S. This is the latest edition of this report that started in 2009, and it's designed to determine the economic impact of nonprofit licensing. So I think it's very fitting that we're doing that here at the BIO International Convention, given that we are surrounded by innovations. But one question that brings up is, where do these innovations actually come from? And so when you actually think about a lot of the innovations that you make and use every day, they actually arose out of nonprofit institutions like universities or hospitals or research institutions. So for example, if you have any family members trying to kick the habit, you could actually thank UCLA. They're the ones that actually developed the initial nicotine patch. Or if you've got kids like me that really hate getting their flu shots and go with the flu mist instead, you can thank the St. Louis School of Medicine and the University of Michigan. Or if you've got seasonal allergies, you could thank Georgetown University. They're the ones that came up with the active ingredient that turned into Allegra ultimately. So you've got three different examples of innovations that are turned into products that are changing the world, helping people. But the question is, where do they come from? So it turns out that many of these innovations are coming from academic research, again, nonprofit institutions. And you can actually trace how these inventions came to arise and how they turned into impact. And then what we'll do with this report is we'll actually quantify what that economic impact actually was. So if we start at the beginning, every year, AUTM, which is a nonprofit association focused on supporting and advancing technology transfer globally, every year we do a national survey where we determine a number of technology transfer and innovation indicators. So these are the results of our latest survey that we released from the year 2020. And there what we found was $83.1 billion went into research at these institutions. And again, these are nonprofits. These are the hospitals, the universities, the research institutions. That research, along the course of doing that research, inventions are developed. And in fact, we recorded over 27,000 inventions were developed in 2020 alone. So you've got all this research, it leads to inventions. We have actually been collecting this data since 1991. And if you look at the data over time, you can see the orange bars is the amount of research expenditure, so that's how much money was spent on research. And then the blue dots are the number of disclosures received every year, which you can see is almost a linear relationship. X dollars equals one invention. And in fact, there's a number for that. And that is, on average, about $3 million of research leads to one invention. And that's actually been remarkably consistent over time. So you've got research, that leads to inventions. Where do you go from there? How do you turn those inventions, like the active ingredient for Allegra, into a product of tomorrow? Now, as each of you know, Georgetown does not sell Allegra, right? Instead, they had to identify a company that was willing to take on that early stage technology and advance that to the point where it actually turned into that product or service of tomorrow. That process is called technology transfer. That is the transfer of those technologies, early stage, often federally funded technologies, to companies that can then advance those innovations into the products of tomorrow. So that's called technology transfer. And that is a critical piece of our innovation ecosystem. So again, some of these innovations arise out of large companies, many of them do not. Many of them arise from these small nonprofit organizations, some of them actually fairly large. All right, so you've got research, that leads to inventions. Then through the process of technology transfer, you actually provide that intellectual property and those innovations that were developed on campuses across the United States and around the world into the hands of companies. That's done through a license or an option agreement. And again, with our licensing survey, we've identified over 10,000 options and license agreements that occurred in 2020 alone. Each of them could be the next cure for cancer, the next type of fuel cell technology. Each of them might be that next innovation that changes the world. Okay, so you've got research that leads to innovations. Those innovations through the process of technology transfer then turn into licenses that ultimately, ideally, turn into the products and services of tomorrow. So it turns out that those license agreements, again, say between a Georgetown or a UCLA and a company, sometimes those are large companies. So the large companies we see on the floor at BIO today. So it could be the AstraZenecas or the J&Js. It also often is the case that those licenses actually go to smaller or mid-sized companies. And in many cases, they actually are the core of a brand new startup company. And so here what you see on the screen now is this is our data from 1994 that highlights the number of startup companies that were created every year. And what you could see is in the last couple of years, we've been close to 1,000 or more startup companies every single year. And we are very fortunate to have a couple of startup company speakers that are going to actually present on what those startup companies do, how they interface with their institution that they license their initial intellectual property from. So, inventions, research leads to inventions. Inventions through tech transfer are licensed to companies that turn them into the products and services of tomorrow. All right, so that gets us to where we are today. And that is our 2020 AUTM-BIO joint report. Now, this is a report that, as John mentioned earlier, we've been doing this since about 2009. We've been releasing this data. And so this is a report that lists 25 years of information. And the purpose of this is to determine what is the economic impact of those innovations. So again, we know there are tons of products that are out there due to nonprofit licensing, but what is actually the economic impact? What's the dollars? And we looked at three major components of economic impact. So what you'll see is either on the AUTM website or the BIO website, that report is now live, and it can be downloaded and reviewed. In addition, there is a media alert on the information. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to walk you through the highlights of this report. And really, there are three major highlights. And again, the purpose of this is to identify what's the economic impact of nonprofit licensing. So through a complicated input-output analysis, we've identified, and this is a report that's commissioned by AUTM-BIO, and it's executed by a number of economists. And what they found was nonprofit licensing accounted for an increase to the US GDP over this 25-year period of up to $1 trillion. In addition, it boosted the US industrial gross output. That's kind of from the beginning to the GDP and everything in between. That's kind of the gross output piece of up to $1.9 trillion. So again, innovations that arose out of nonprofit institutions led to a remarkable increase in GDP of $1 trillion and gross output of $1.9 trillion. And just as importantly, it was calculated to support up to 6.5 million jobs. So that is those people in your neighborhood or around those institutions are now employed. And we're going to hear from a couple of them a little later today that are going to highlight the importance of academic licensing and the economic impact that they have. So again, each of you should have this report. It should be on your chairs, and it can be downloaded from both the AUTM and the BIO website. So that is the quick overview of what the report says. What I want to do now is I actually want to provide some color commentary. So these numbers are ginormous. And so sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around what does 6.5 million jobs looks like? How do you ever get to $1 trillion of GDP? And so what we have today is we've got two different startup companies. So two of the, again, about 1,000, 1,100 every single year that are formed that are going to tell us about their route, their story, and how nonprofit licensing created their company and created the jobs and the products and services that they offer today. So with that, I would like to welcome Judge Schneider from Nashville Biosciences to give us a quick overview of his company. Why don't you join us, Judd? All right.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. My name is Judge Schneider. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Nashville Biosciences. And we are actually a subsidiary company of Vanderbilt University Medical Center. We were formed in 2018, really to commercialize a long-standing research project around de-identified data within the medical center. We're fully owned and funded by the medical center, so we are a subsidiary. And we are continuing to grow. So we have about 30 FTEs in the US and UK, and we're continuing to add more every year. And we have a large number of clients that range across biopharma spectrum. And we're continuing to add to those every single day. Really, the core asset we have is something called Bioview. And Bioview started at Vanderbilt back in 2004, and really it started a number of NIH research projects. It's been cited over 150 times in peer-reviewed literature. And it is one of the largest real-world databases of electronic health records and genetic data out there. And so what do we do? How do we fit into this picture? So NashBio really enables the commercial side of this. So we enable pharma research, product development, AI, and a number of different applications of this data outside of the medical center and outside of the academic sphere. We use this deep longitudinal data to really help our customers bring their products, perform their analyses, and commercialize those new drugs and new treatments that are out there today. We have a unique approach, and this has been honed over a number of years at Vanderbilt. We've taken and adopted at NashBio. We combine data experts who know the data inside and out, as every data set's slightly unique, with clinical data, with imaging data and with genetic data and deep analytical capabilities to really offer a service for our customers to use this data in whatever application they might see fit. We partner with a wide range of companies. Some logos are here. We have others as well. And really the source of our data is from Vanderbilt University Medical Center and Vanderbilt Health. And Vanderbilt's a large tertiary medical center in the southeast United States. It is nationally ranked in a number of pediatric and adult specialties. It's one of the largest transplant centers in the U.S. It's also the only NCI-designated comprehensive cancer center for both adults and children, and we consistently receive a large amount of NIH funding every year to power biomedical research engine at Vanderbilt. We also have, uniquely, one of the largest bioinformatics and medical informatics departments in the world, which was basically used this asset for a number of years. So what is Bioview? Bioview is one of the largest real-world databases out there. It's deep. We're talking about on average of 11 years of history per subject in the database. It was, and everyone in the database is fully consented, and it's de-identified. So de-identified data that's fully consented for research and complete longitudinal health records. Also, beyond the health records themselves, we have genetic data as well as imaging data that is fully linked back into the resource. And it's also a living database that's continually updated as new patients come into the medical center and are consented into the database itself. Currently, we have about 3.4 million electronic health records in our database, so it's a very large data set. And really, it breaks down to these three categories of data. Clinical data, which basically comes from the electronic health record, diagnostics, your claims data, your laboratory data, progress notes, so on and so forth. We also have about 10% of our population that's uniquely consented for providing a genomic DNA sample. And that has been used in a number of different ways for powering research. We also have, and we just launched this product about a couple months ago, we have a large image repository database that provides, right now we have CT, PET-CT, and MRI with other modalities being incorporated soon. Now, all this data is linked, so you can crosswalk between the actual image data that's de-identified and understand what's happening within that patient encounter around that data. The same with the genomics. It's all de-identified but linked back to that record. So it makes a very powerful combination. And it really provides that complete healthcare picture of what happens throughout someone's healthcare journey and allows us really to power a number of studies based on that information. And Nashville Biosciences has taken that data and really productized that into a number of different unique combinations to allow our customers really to use that data more effectively. And we like to say that we can come up with 100 ways of using this data, but our customers can come up with 1,000 or 10,000 more. There's so much more creativity out in the market than what we can come up with. So we just act as the enablers to help power their research. And what do we enable? We've done projects where we do disease target identification, so identifying new genetic targets for cause of disease. We've actually done a lot of real-world cohort design, so trying to build cohorts looking at economics research, looking at placebo arms for single-arm trials. We do a lot of molecular data generation, so we have a bioinformatics department that works with the genome data and powers that research. We've also done some work to help optimize clinical trials. So basically looking at inclusion-exclusion criteria to see in a real-world population how many people will actually qualify for that trial. And we work along the entire R&D spectrum, everything from very early research all the way up to post-market monitoring. And we've done projects in every one of these spheres all along the way. We have an experienced leadership team. I'm honored to work with a number of these folks here. Leland Ekstrom is our founder and our CEO. And we have also a fantastic board who have a number of years of experience. If you'd like to get in touch with us, I'd encourage you to reach out to our business development team. James Stover is our Chief Business Officer, and there's a number of folks at the conference who are on his team. With that, I'd like to take some, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer some. No.
Well, first off, thank you for the presentation. My name is Laura Spotsky. I'm from the University of Louisville, and Nashville has been such a leader in the collection and sharing of data, the way that we do our work. I think of things like the big CTSA portal, where they got everyone kind of on the same page for how to do clinical trial agreements. I think of portals like the MTA Share that Vanderbilt did. And I'm just wondering, you alluded to this work with other academics and that you can be sort of this clearinghouse for data. Can you tell us a little bit more about how academics can work with Nashville Biosciences, especially in that sphere of data? And then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I give Vanderbilt and Tech Transfer specifically a lot of credit here because we were actually designed to be purely the commercial side. So recognizing that, working with a for-profit entity, we actually have streamlined that process quite a bit. And we do actually get quite a few inquiries from academic researchers, and we have a very close collaboration with Alan Bentley at Vanderbilt, who we shuttle a lot of those queries to. And they have a very well-trodden and good workflow for enabling academic researchers to actually access that data. But we are kind of set aside as that for-profit access. So we actually have the license to the data just for for-profit or commercial or private sector companies.
And then my follow-on question, you shared that you have access to data for imaging, but you were talking more about full-body imaging, CT scans, MRI, et cetera. Do you also have access to pathology images? Is that part of your suite of services or not?
Right now, we do not. That is something that we've heard a lot about in the market, and we are working with our counterparts at the medical center to potentially bring that online. But that is really, yeah. I'm happy to speak with you as well. We actually worked really closely with the medical center to bring on new data types into the resource because it's not just for NashBio to use. We are actually building a lot of these resources back into the medical center so that the researchers at the medical center can use them. So when we bring on new modalities such as images, we're actually working very closely with our partners there so that the entire research community gets access to it and not just NashBio. Yes?
So again, this is a great example of technology that existed at Vanderbilt, but never would have actually turned into something that could actually help patients. And so you've kind of been that conduit to allow that to occur. Can you maybe, and you don't need to list names, can you maybe just kind of walk us through what a relationship looks like with a company and how that Vanderbilt technology and information, that database, was useful in the formation of a downstream diagnostic or drug? Can you maybe just walk me through kind of how that works?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I actually gave a presentation last week on this with one of our customers, and they are doing research on basically new mechanisms of pain sensitivity. And what was unique about that particular project was they were trying to assemble a large cohort of subjects with a rare disease that had some neuropathic pain. We were able to utilize the combination of genetic and clinical data basically to narrow in on that cohort of de-identified data to provide to them. What that allows them to do basically is identify novel genetic indicators of pain. Now, this is at a large pharma company, and they have a program developed specifically for drugs researching that particular indication. And another example that we have is we've actually worked with a company to do post-market monitoring of the effectiveness of a treatment. So for example, we worked with a company that was licensed by a government basically to identify, do cost effectiveness research on a very novel cancer treatment that came out in the market. That data didn't exist, but since Vanderbilt had a number of those subjects and we had such deep data, we could actually combine it together and provide real-world evidence that was used in basically payment decisions for a particular treatment. Those are two examples, but we have many more that we've worked with over the years and continuing to work with.
All right, I've got just one last question.
Yes.
You can totally take a pass on this if you want. I don't know how much of your information is public, but I'd love to know just sort of financially, like as a science company, what do you generate revenue-wise? And then can you talk about some of the employees that you have and the number of where they came from?
Yeah, I'm not going to cite revenue figures, but I can tell you that we are profitable as an early stage company. That's always a fantastic milestone to achieve, and we've been there for a couple years. So we have about 30. It's always growing. Full-time employees. We're spread across really the entire U.S. So I'm based in San Diego. Our home office is in Nashville, but we have offices in Boston, North Carolina, Ohio. We're kind of all spread out. We're a fully remote company, and we have a wide range of skill sets in the company. A number of folks do have a PhD or a master's degree, but we have some folks that just have bachelors. We have a number of different skill sets within the organization, so anything from bioinformatics experience to just general genetics experience, but also a lot of more customer-facing types of experience. So not all biomedical researchers. We have folks with backgrounds in life sciences, but also in product development for major wearable companies. So it kind of runs the spectrum. We really look to bring on people who are really excellent in what they do and join a culture that really thrives on that.
Do you have time for one more?
I think so, yeah.
I had a question about clinical trials and clinical trial data.
Yeah.
Is that something that you all manage for others? Is there some mechanism or way? With clinical trials, it's always really tricky.
Yes.
Because some patients are consented very broadly, some very narrowly for a trial. I'm part of the All of Us trial.
Yes.
Which is a trial of 1 million people that the NIH is trying to enroll. They're a little over halfway there so far. We're just following people prospectively to look at their health and what happens to them. And we gave very broad consents for our materials and information to be shared with other researchers. Are you seeing other examples of that? Examples where clinical trials, which for many years were sort of very closed down,
Yeah.
and you could only do exactly what you consented in the original consent, as to using a service like this as a way to maybe reach back to the patient and re-ask them, oh, we've got XYZ trial, would you be interested in using your data or your sample that was gathered for this trial with this other one?
Yeah, so that's a set of really awesome questions. I will go through a few answers to those. So first, our database is actually non-recontactable. So within Bioview itself, a decision was made a number of years ago, basically, that subjects cannot be recontacted for inclusion in clinical trials. But that being said, we have done a number of projects with companies who are looking for evidence to support a single-arm clinical trial. So we've actually generated, we had one project where there was a very stringent set of inclusion criteria. It was subjects had an invasive procedure, and then they had developed a rare cancer, and then they failed standard of care. And that already you're talking about a very narrow funnel. But because our database was so deep, we had a number of these subjects in the database already. And we were able to work with that company to, one, develop an ECRF for their trial, that matched their electronic research capture form. It's the typical data form for the clinical trial data is usually stored in. Vanderbilt also licenses REDCap, so we were able to use REDCap basically to develop that form. But then also we used our relationships with other medical centers to go out and collect additional subjects from medical centers throughout the country to increase the population. And when we looked at the data, their single-arm trial definitely showed a statistically significant improvement in survival for those subjects. As far as consent goes, I think that we're in an interesting time, with consent and data, and the narrow consent that is within a lot of clinical trials makes a lot of sense for that particular study. I think a number of medical centers and other nonprofit institutions are starting to recognize that not only is this data potentially valuable externally, but just internally, there's a lot of really valuable uses to having de-identified data for research or for other internal uses. So I think we're going to start to see that expansion of consent. But I think it's really important that there is consent, and that is a very critical thing that one we honor very seriously. All right, thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Judd. So again, I just want you to just think about this. That is one startup company that probably had one license agreement that arose from one invention disclosure. And again, last year alone, 27,000 invention disclosures, 10,000 plus license agreements. And you could see the impact a single company, a single invention that turned into a license due to tech transfer that resulted in this company is now actually improving care around the world. So that's just kind of one example. So take what Judd just described, now multiply, and didn't want to share revenue numbers, which I totally understand, but imagine what his expenses are with 30 employees. They're bringing in some money. Now multiply that by 1,000, 1,100 startup companies alone. We're not even talking about the licenses to Merck or Pfizer or anything else. So you can imagine the economic impact that's being generated. He talked about 30. Again, multiply that by 1,000 startups and forget about everything else in between. So there is a ton of economic impact that occurs that arises from these nonprofit innovations. So with that, I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any questions about the report. I know the report was just released. It's pretty lengthy, and again, revolves around really three major line items. Again, gross domestic product in the U.S., gross output, and jobs. And again, this is a follow-up report to a multiple iteration co-branded report between AUTM-BIO, where we commissioned this report that's accomplished by some economic advisors that generate this model. So any questions about the report itself? Otherwise, I'll be in the back of the room, happy to answer any privately if you'd prefer. All right? All right.
I know that a lot of the data gets generated from the Autumn Activity and Licensing Survey, where many Autumn members fill out a lengthy survey about economic and other indicators about tech transfer. But the people who fill out that survey are really only a subset of the total research activity. And there's a lot of reasons why people wouldn't fill out the survey. Maybe they aren't members of Autumn yet, which everybody should be, but whatever. Or they just didn't have the time or capacity that year. There's a lot of different reasons. But how is then the people who are missing from that data, how is that summed up to get a total number of locations?
Yeah, so that's actually a really important point that you just made. If I just step back for a second, I mentioned earlier today, this was all generated using an input-output model. What that means is it uses a certain input. That input is the autumn data. And then through some complex modeling, it provides the output in the form of GDP, gross output, and jobs. Now, Laura's point's exactly right. What she's talking about is not every institution in the world or in the US reports their data to Autumn. Now, we could do one of two, or the economists could do one of two things. They could either just take the data that we provide them and we say, look, we know it's not all the institutions. It's a lot of them, it's not all of them. They could either take that and generate their output data, or they could estimate. And what they actually decided to do is, we don't even want to estimate. We're just going to take the data you provide. So in doing so, we're actually undercounting in that that's only based on the input we have. And so it's undercounting. No, I wouldn't say it's that high. Generally, the licensing survey brings about, 67, 70% response rate. So we receive a lot of them, and most of them are the large institution. But still, it's an undercount. Great. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I will give you back some time in your day. All right. Thanks, everybody.